Okay, we're going to learn about Ecce Romani, chapter 43, and using the perfect passive participle, we're going to learn about a grammatical construction called the ablative absolute. This is on pages 176 and 177 in your book. To start, we're going to review the perfect passive participle, or the PPP, which we covered in depth in chapter 33. So the perfect passive participle is the same thing as the fourth principal part of a verb. We translate it having been something. Since it's a participle, it's going to modify a noun, as that third bullet point says. It's going to modify a noun in gender, number, case. And the perfect aspect of this means that it takes place before the action of the main verb. So we saw this sentence in chapter 33 at the bottom of the page here. Quoquus vocatus ab omnibus laudatus est. Vocatus there is a PPP, the fourth principal part of voco, and we translate it having been called. The whole sentence then, since vocatus modifies quoquus, cook, we would say the cook, having been called, was praised by everybody. And again, you'll remember that example from our videos in chapter 33. We can shift that a little bit, keep the same meaning of the sentence, but shift the words to say something like this: Quoquum vocatum omnes laudaverunt. Here's our translation. They all praised the cook having been summoned. So here, omnes is our subject, laudaverunt is our verb, and quoquum is an accusative direct object. Since it's the cook who was summoned or called, vocatum is also accusative, agreeing with it. So again, what we've done from the first sentence to this one is just change subjects, verbs, and objects. That just goes to show that a perfect passive participle can be any case to modify a noun that it's agreeing with. That's, again, just a very brief rundown of the PPP. If that's confusing for you, I would recommend going back and looking at that chapter 33 video again. But for right now, let's move on to what's at hand in chapter 44. This is called the ablative absolute, which is a very specific use of the perfect passive participle. In an ablative absolute, the perfect passive participle, it does not agree with the subject of a sentence. It does not agree with the direct object of a sentence. It agrees with some other word that's going to be in the ablative case, hence the name ablative absolute. So here's a sentence. The same thought, the same sense as the previous two sentences, but a little difference. Quoquo vocato omnes canam laudaverunt. The translation is, the cook having been summoned, everyone praised the dinner. So we see our main clause there, omnes canam laudaverunt, everyone praised the dinner. This phrase, quoquo vocato, set off by commas, both of those words are in the ablative. That's going to give us the ablative part. And since it's separate, since it's sectioned off from the rest of the sentence, the Latin word for that is absolutus, hence the absolute in ablative absolute. It's separate from the rest of the sentence. So again, a translation, the cook having been summoned, everyone praised dinner. Now we could say something like when the cook was summoned, since he was summoned, because he was summoned, or most literally with the cook having been summoned. Since with is one of those standard ways that we're going to translate an ablative case in any word. More about that to come in a few minutes. So here, again, now that you see it underlined, quoquo vocato, we call that an ablative absolute. It's separate from the rest of the sentence. Both words are in the ablative, and one of those is a participle, a perfect passive participle, vocato. Some more things about the ablative absolute. I could use a present participle if I want. So the previous example used a perfect passive participle, but I could use a present participle. Let's see what this looks like. Here's a sentence, fure vestimenta surripienta sextus in apoditarium ingreditur. Our translation, while the thief is stealing the clothes, Sextus enters the changing room. So here, what we have underlined is our ablative absolute. Fure is ablative. Surripienta, that's an ablative singular present participle. The NT is the giveaway there. Vestimenta is accusative. It's the direct object of surripienta, but it's still part of the ablative absolute, we say. So that ablative absolute is with the thief stealing the clothes, or while the thief is stealing the clothes. The main clause here, Sextus enters the changing room. Sextus in apoditarium ingreditur. So what that means is that an ablative absolute needs to contain a participle, either a perfect passive participle, like we saw in the sentence with the cook, or in this sentence here, a present participle with NT. In either case, that participle has to be ablative, and it has to agree with some other noun that is also in the ablative case. Here we get, again, just to demonstrate NT, that's showing us we have a present participle with the ing in stealing in our English translation. So some rules about ablative absolutes. If it uses a present participle, that means that the action in the ablative absolute is going on at the same time as the main verb. If, on the other hand, I use a perfect passive participle, a PPP, that action is completed, is finished before the action of the main verb. And that should make sense based on what we know about the various tenses, present and perfect. Present means now, it's the same time. Perfect in the past, of course. A few more things about ablative absolutes. The verb to be, esse, does not have a present participle. But in certain circumstances, I can see ablative absolutes where this is understood. One of these would be me custode. This would be translated with me being a guard. The English word being, there's no equivalent for that in Latin. We have to supply it. So sometimes you will see an ablative absolute without a participle. And if that's the case, understand being. Understand this implied verb to be. So these ablative absolutes are tricky maybe a little bit at first, but the more you get used to them, they're actually quite nice, and they make translating Latin a lot easier and a little bit more fun. The Romans really liked them. So let's get some practice. This is going to be exercise 44D on page 178. So if you want to turn there in your books, let's do number 1. Pueris in ludo clamantibus, magister iratus fit. Try and translate this on your own right now. Pause the video and see what you can come up with. Our ablative absolute is what's set off there by the comma, pueris in ludo clamantibus. Because of that nt, we should recognize that we have a present participle. So most literally, if you want to translate these most literally, which is what we're going to primarily do in class, begin using the word with. So say with the, and then just go word for word. With the pueris, with the boys, clamantibus, that's present participle, so shouting in ludo, in school. With the boys shouting in school, magister iratus fit. What did we get for that? Hopefully, teacher becomes angry. Never happens at Mount Carmel, right? So here's our translation. With the boys shouting in school, the teacher becomes angry. Our ablative absolute, this deal with the boys shouting, is completely separate. It's absolutely, if you will, separate from the main clause here, the teacher becomes angry. How about number 2? Magistro irato pueri e ludo missi sunt. Again, take a second to pause the video, try and translate. Our ablative absolute here, again, magistro irato. Very often, ablative absolutes come at the beginning of the sentence. Not always, but very, very often, especially in our book here. So that's something to look out for. So, magistro irato, that means with the teacher being angry, irato. Pueri e ludo missi sunt. Hopefully you got this combo here. The boys were sent from school. Were sent home. Maybe we could even supply from school. So ablative absolute, magistro irato. That's the first 2. I would recommend on your own you try some more in 44D. We'll be doing this in class, but the best way to get good at ablative absolutes is just to practice them and get used to the difference between a present participle and a perfect passive participle. Thanks. See you next time.